Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Weekend Edition. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Licciardello.
This week, President Trump completes his dramatic about-face by signing the Epstein Files Transparency Act into law. But how much actual transparency can we expect?
And what about those rumours that Jeffrey Epstein's wealth and influence came from being a foreign agent? Is there even more to this story? But first...
And we will start with the week's big story. Here's how it was being covered on the right-wing One America News Network and Dan Ball's Real America show.
Tonight on Real America, the Senate unanimously passes the Epstein Files bill, now sending it to President Trump's desk for his signature. The question is this finally going to reveal some big shocking news or just be a dud?
Well, that actually is quite a reasonable question to ask, because it could well be a dud if there's really nothing there or if all of the controversial stuff is redacted. So, I don't know, maybe One America isn't so bad after all. What else are you covering tonight, Dan?
And Michigan under Muslim siege. The city of Dearborn has now been invaded by Islamic extremists to the point of being conquered. But American patriots aren't backing down. They're fighting back with their words. We'll show you.
OK, they really are that bad. This week, a unanimous vote to release the files was expected in the House of Representatives after President Trump's backflip on the weekend, bowing to immense political pressure and an internal Republican Party revolt, finally urging Republicans to vote for the move that he had been opposing for months. But in the end, there was one single holdout. Republican Representative Clay Higgins, until now best known for supporting Donald Trump's false claims about Haitian immigrants last year. He once described Haitians on social media as wild, eating pets, voodoo. So he seems nice. And after the House voted, Speaker Mike Johnson, who was a grudging yes vote, said, really, Donald Trump has nothing to worry about.
The Biden DOJ had every one of these files in their possession for 4 years, and neither Hakeem Jeffries or Ro Khanna or Thomas Massie or any of them ever said a word about it. President Trump has clean hands. He's not worried about it. I talk to him all the time. He has nothing to do with this. He's frustrated that they're turning it into a political issue, and it's not surprising because the Democrats have nothing else to talk about.
Well, the president may or may not have anything to worry about, but he's certainly been showing his frustration this week, as he often does, by attacking reporters.
Mr. President, why wait for Congress to release the Epstein files? Why not just do it now?
You know, it's not the question that I mind, it's your attitude. I think you are a terrible reporter. You're a terrible person and a terrible reporter. As far as the Epstein files is, I have nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein. I threw him out of my club many years ago because I thought he was a sick pervert. But I guess I turned out to be right.
So Trump is now claiming vindication for realising that Epstein was a sick pervert before anyone else. But as we discussed on Monday night's show, we still don't know why Trump didn't report that sick pervert to the authorities. And he still didn't answer that very valid question. Why don't you just release the files rather than wait for Congress and then the Department of Justice? Because, well, it's almost like he's just trying to buy some more time to let the DOJ redact anything that they, or indeed Trump, wants redacted. And maybe that is exactly what is going on here, because according to Reuters this week, the White House was quietly lobbying senators to slow walk their vote, even as President Trump was publicly insisting that his administration had nothing to hide and urging Congress to act. A former political foe, Vice President Kamala Harris, isn't buying Trump's newfound respect for the legislative process either.
All of a sudden, he is saying he'll wait to see what Congress does. Since when? All of a sudden, now he's waiting for Congress to greenlight what he will do or wants to do? Come on. Yeah. So, release the files.
So, why the continued foot-dragging? Polls suggest that many Americans hold suspicions about their president. YouGov asked voters, do you think that Donald Trump was involved in crimes allegedly committed by Jeffrey Epstein? 46% say yes, 29% say no. And if you think that 46% is mostly Democrats who are against him anyway, yes, you're right, although 9% of Republicans think that Trump was somehow involved in Epstein's crimes. Then finally yesterday, President Trump did sign the bill into law, setting the clock ticking. The Justice Department has 30 days, now 29, to release the files. That will be less than a week before Christmas. Possibly good timing if you want to keep media coverage and public attention to a minimum, but this story has refused to go away so far, so I doubt it will deflect too much attention even then. Meanwhile, last week's release of more than 20,000 pages of emails to and from Jeffrey Epstein showed that Larry Summers, a former US Treasury Secretary under Bill Clinton and economic advisor to Barack Obama, quote, maintained congenial contact with the convicted child sex trafficker well into 2019. Larry Summers now says that his association with Jeffrey Epstein was a, quote, major error of judgment. Do you think, Larry? Summers has announced that he will now step aside from his teaching duties at Harvard University after they launched their own investigation into his relationship with Epstein. And Summers also says he'll resign from the board of directors at the artificial intelligence tech firm OpenAI. So retreating from public life, which suggests that maybe he knows there's even more on the way.
Well, he had no choice. He wanted to keep on teaching. I can't believe he wanted to keep on teaching, given what he was talking to Jeffrey Epstein about was him trying to bed a younger woman
At Harvard.
At Harvard, yeah, who he wasn't teaching, but he was her mentor. So that was very inappropriate.
Yeah.
And by the way, you say he talked to Epstein up to 2019. He talked to Epstein up to the day that Epstein was arrested. He went all the way to mining information of Epstein about how he can have sex with woman at Harvard. It's just, what a shocker.
This is 7 or 8 years after even Andrew Mountbatten Windsor seems to have finally cut off his contacts with Epstein. And this is a decade and a half after Epstein went to prison for sex offences involving underage girls.
Yes. Although, amazingly, Lawrence Summers isn't the worst offender from last week. Someone who I think was even worse was a lady called Stacey Plaskett, who a lot of people wouldn't have heard of. Yep. She is the non-voting delegate of the US Virgin Islands.
So she's a Democrat, she's a member of Congress, but she doesn't get to vote, but she does get to sit in on sessions and committee inquiries and so on.
Exactly. Now, she has a long relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Nothing illegal, I want to emphasise, and nothing sexual, purely financial.
Right.
He donates to her. She
Right.
is his representative. Like, he has an island in the Virgin Islands.
Right.
Right? And so she's been around for a long time. Even before she was a non-voting delegate, she was a general counsel in the area. She has had dealings with Jeffrey Epstein for decades. And as I said, they all involve Jeffrey Epstein paying her lots of money. In fact, at one point in time, some of Jeffrey Epstein's victims tried to sue her a couple of years back, where I believe the grounds were that they believe she facilitated, amongst other people, facilitated Epstein in his ongoing sex trafficking operation by ensuring he received preferential treatment and unfettered, unmonitored freedom while in the US Virgin Islands. Now, that lawsuit didn't go anywhere, but the fact is she's been in and around Jeffrey Epstein for a long time. And last week, we discovered, one of the emails that came out was her asking for money. Surprise, surprise. It was this email here saying, but this is her personally, saying, if you would share this invitation with Jeffrey, I'd be much appreciative. I would be grateful for his support and the support of those that he may direct to assist me. She was trying to organise to meet him personally while she was in New York to take money off him. And that was in 2018. Long after everyone knew what Jeffrey Epstein was like.
That is pretty extraordinary. The fact that a member of Congress is asking a high-wealth individual for a campaign contribution or to connect them with other high-wealth individuals who might make a campaign contribution, that in itself is not unusual. It's not illegal, it's not unethical. It is a form of corruption to the minds of many outsiders, but in the American House of Representatives, they're up for re-election every 2 years. They're constantly campaigning, constantly asking for money, but taking it at that time from somebody who is already a convicted sex offender is appalling.
But it gets worse, because in 2019 she was in a hearing of Michael Cohen, when Michael Cohen was testifying to
Trump's former fixer.
That's right, to the House, and Epstein started texting her. First of all, he was watching her on TV, and he was texting her saying, "Oh, you look good, great dress." And she, "Oh, thanks." "Oh, you look well. Why are you chewing?" "Oh, it's a nervous habit. I chew a lot." That kind of stuff. And then he starts suggesting the questions that she should ask. And in particular, there was a text where he wrote, Cohen brought up Rona, keeper of the secrets. And Plaskett replies, Rona? Quick, I'm up next. Is that an acronym? And Epstein texts back, that's his assistant. Clearly she wasn't 100% sure what was going on here. Why don't we just have a look at her question directly after that text?
Mr. Weisenberg and other individuals, Ms. Rona. Who are those individuals? Are they with the Trump Organization?
They are.
Are there other people that we should be meeting with?
So, Alan Weisselberg is the chief financial officer.
Uh-huh. You got to quickly give us as many names as you can so we can get to them.
Yes, ma'am.
Is Ms. Rona, what is Ms. Rona's position?
Rona Graff is Mr. Trump's executive assistant.
And would she be able to corroborate many of the statements that you've made here?
Yes, her office is directly next to his, and she's involved in a lot that went on.
And then straight after that, Epstein texts her, good work. She had no idea what she was saying. She thought Rona was her last name. She didn't even know it was her first name. She was basically just reciting Epstein's question for him like a ventriloquist puppet. I mean, she was caught so red-handed last week by that. She didn't even try to deny it. She just completely admitted that she did indeed take the question from Jeff Epstein, but this is her excuse. It's one for the ages.
I believe that Jeffrey Epstein had information, and I was going to get information to get at the truth. Having a friendship with him is not something that I would deem to have. And so I'm just looking forward. I'm moving forward. And I think that that's what we as American people should do, is move forward.
That's what we should do, John. We should move forward.
Looking forward, moving forward.
That's what this whole Epstein thing's about. It's about moving forward.
Let's not dwell in the past. I mean, we don't know in reality, because we do know that political contributions such as Jeffrey Epstein made to countless political figures, and I'm sure we're going to hear about more of them, but that buys you access. One form of access is you get their cell phone number.
Yeah.
You write them a cheque for $100,000 and you can call in favours and you can stay in touch and you can manipulate people, as Epstein clearly would do if he's, for his own purposes trying to damage Trump or ask a question to Michael Cohen or whatever. I mean, it's blatant. It's unusual they get caught out in this way, but we'd probably discover in the halls of Congress that kind of coaching from big money donors. It's why they are big money donors.
Yeah, totally. But my point is this. I'm not saying that she should be stoned. As you say, this is part of the culture of Washington, which is a problem.
Of course.
But what I'm saying is, if you get caught red-handed in this kind of situation, you just need to own it.
Yeah.
You can't just dismiss it and say we're moving forward. Hakeem Jeffries, they have spent the last week nailing Donald Trump because Epstein said he was dirty at one point in time. And this is what Hakeem Jeffries has to say about this Stacey Plaskett situation.
But do you think it was appropriate for her to be texting with Jeffrey Epstein 11 years after he pleaded guilty?
I mean, I have not had a conversation with Stacey Plaskett to discuss this issue because we've been focused today on making sure that there was a decisive vote as it related to the Epstein files and the release. I'm thankful for the work of Representative Massey, of Ro Khanna, but most importantly, the survivors.
He didn't address it in any way, shape or form and hid behind the survivors. The cheek of him.
Yeah.
Then Jamie Raskin, who is also a very prominent Democrat in prosecuting the other side about this kind of stuff. Conservatives have been seeing this clip around, and I think it's fair enough to point out the hypocrisy of the way he talks about Epstein when he's discussing Donald Trump versus the way he refers to Epstein when he's discussing Stacey Plaskett.
One thing he's clearly doing is changing the subject from a different form of crime, which is child sex trafficking, which Jeffrey Epstein was a mastermind of. Donald Trump's name apparently appears throughout the Epstein file.
They've arraigned a Democratic member for taking a phone call from her constituent, Jeffrey Epstein, in the middle of a hearing. I still don't see what the charge is. Where is the ethical transgression?
He's just a constituent.
Yeah.
Where's the ethical transgression?
That's right. He'd paid his debt to society. He'd been to jail.
Yeah.
He was a free man.
They've got to make up their minds.
Yeah.
They've got to make up. Do they care about sexual abuse of children or not?
Well, the politicians care about politics. I think that's the takeaway.
But like, if this is how the game's going to be played for the next few months, where people are just savaging the other side every time they're even mentioned, but they refuse to take even the slightest amount of responsibility for people on their side, refuse to critique them in the slightest,
Yeah.
We're going to get absolutely nowhere. It's going to make everyone more cynical, and it will actually be worse off than before we began.
Yeah, and to an extent that cynicism is entirely justified. There is a reason why Democrats could have brought these Epstein files out during Joe Biden's presidency, or at least for a couple of years when they had the House majority there. And there's a reason as well why this whole process, the discharge petition that everyone's celebrating all of a sudden this week, it was being driven by a couple of renegades. Thomas Massie on the Republican side, Ro Khanna on the Democratic side, and that their co-sponsors, at least their fellow travellers, were the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Nancy Mace, Lauren Boebert as well.
Loose cannons, yeah.
It's loose cannons because there are just as many Democrats who are going to be embarrassed through their associations with Jeffrey Epstein. And this is what Trump is counting on, that this is the stuff that will get out there. So there'll be a sense after the next 6 to 8 weeks, how long the process of disclosure takes, that, oh, well, both sides are as bad as each other. They were all in on it. Now, nobody's saying that Stacey Plaskett was a close personal friend of Epstein for 15 years, as Donald Trump was, and there's nothing in Epstein's emails to say that she knew about all the girls. Yeah. So there are substantial differences here, but this is certainly a case that people on both sides would like this to go away, and it refuses to go away.
Yeah, when you don't squash the minor infringers, it protects the major infringers.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, for more on this, I spoke to Eric O'Neill. He's an attorney. He's also a former FBI counterintelligence operative. He played a major role in the arrest and conviction of FBI double agent Robert Hanssen. You remember he was spying for years on behalf of Russia. Well, O'Neill is very familiar with what information can now and cannot now be released in a major case like the Epstein files. Here's some of our conversation. Eric O'Neill, welcome to the program. Is it safe to assume that the new investigation that President Trump ordered into Bill Clinton, Larry Summers and others, less than a week before he ultimately signed the Epstein Transparency Act into law, is going to be the loophole that the Department of Justice uses to redact a lot of what we see in under 30 days?
Well, let's look at that particular carve-out. That carve-out is always there. In any investigation that is conducted by law enforcement, if it is an ongoing investigation, you're never going to want to release information. There's a reason for that. The reason is that you don't want to unfairly send punitive information about an individual under investigation or identify them until the investigation is completed, a grand jury is convened, and there is an indictment. Otherwise, you might send a lot of bad negative information about somebody who could be innocent. And any investigation should foundationally be trying to prove innocence and not just prosecute. So here, yes, by launching investigations into prominent Democrats, those investigative goals and pursuit by the Department of Justice and FBI will not be part of the Epstein files information that is produced in the next 30 days by the Department of Justice. And I should add that I am hoping that there are other investigations of individuals who may have been complicit in some of the horrendous things that happened during Epstein's tenure, not only on the island, but on sexual abuse of minors that are currently under investigation. And one of the things that I hope to find out is that from what we won't see is that there are open investigations that are being pursued right now. I think that a bad result would be if the Department of Justice does not redact any open investigations, which would signal that they're not actually pursuing anything, and that would be problematic to me.
Eric, we've heard in recent months, particularly from Attorney General Pam Bondi, that there is no there. There is no Epstein client list. There is no actionable information. There is nothing more to investigate, nothing to see, nothing to release. Does that therefore make this decision to open a new investigation just before releasing the files look rather suspicious?
Yes, that's certainly possible. And one of the problems with the release of the DOJ's information is it does put pressure on the DOJ to now go start investigating individuals, because if they then release information and it doesn't show that they're pursuing anybody, then that will create additional scrutiny on the administration and the Department of Justice and the FBI saying, we know that there were bad actors. The victims have come forward and said that they were abused. So why are you not prosecuting or investigating any of these individuals? Like I said, if we see that there are no investigations, if in fact what Pam Bondi was true and that there is no Epstein list and there's no one to pursue, then I think that's a bad outcome for this now 3 administration long saga.
So anything related to ongoing investigations aside, what are the other areas where it is appropriate for the Epstein files to be redacted before release?
Certainly. Well, we talked about ongoing investigations, and you almost never see that. Now, I will say that for ongoing investigations, the Congressional Act does say that any information withheld there must be incredibly narrow, and the DOJ has to report why they are withholding that information. And that is going to give us a window into how many of these investigations are happening and the sorts of investigations they're pursuing. So at least we'll know that it's happening. Here are some other categories. The most important, of course, is anything related to victims. We don't want any information that could identify a victim. These are the people that are harmed. They don't deserve to have their names and their identities dragged through the mud. They need to decide on their own whether they want to come forward and should not be in any of these releases. And I'm sure that the major effort of scrutiny is going to make sure that any and all information related to that will be redacted. Another area is cooperating witnesses. Now, here's where things could get a little bit sticky. If someone committed a crime, and hopefully a smaller crime, and now is cooperating as a witness or a confidential informant to the DOJ or FBI, then that person is not going to be part of any of these revelations. That name will be redacted, and they will just be listed as confidential informant 1 or some sort of designation like that. Which means that someone who potentially did something, and I hope it would be minor, will potentially get away with it. But the idea there in any investigation is you use the small fish to get at the big fish. Grand jury material is not going to be part of this. So we would love to see any of the grand jury material and deliberations and the information that the prosecutor used to get the indictment for Epstein or any co-conspirator or anyone else that they are seeking to prosecute. But that information is very typically not provided in any disclosure, and that would include any deliberations that were made by the grand jury. And then finally, internal DOJ or FBI deliberations. So the sausage making and how they decide who to pursue and what information is there. If you're very smart as an investigator, you have your general counsel, you have your FBI attorneys, your DOJ attorneys, part of all of those communications, and you can protect it with an attorney-client privilege, and there will be a large bucket of that information that we won't see. Now, once again, the Act does say that anything that the DOJ does not provide, that they redact, they have to explain why. And and the way this works is they get 30 days to respond. Between you and me, John, I don't think they make that time frame. I think that they get close to the 30 days and ask for more time, and will probably be given it. I've been on the side of the government pursuing the redactions, doing that work. 30 days is somewhat of a short time frame. But after they get that done, then they have 15 days after that to explain what they withheld. And I think that in their explanations of what they withheld, someone like me and others like me will be able to read between the lines and see a little deeper without having the actual facts of that information.
And what will then happen in that 15-day period after the files are released, where Congress can ask for information about what was redacted, which politically exposed individuals were named? Presumably, they're not going to then name the people who were not named. So what information do you expect to come out?
They're not going to provide any names or real details, but it becomes part of the congressional record. So we will be able to see it. It'll be published. They'll be very careful in redacting the redactions, right, to make sure that they are not inadvertently disclosing information there. But they will say in a broad brush categories of information that they redacted and why. So they'll give the particular legal rule, or they'll give the procedural rule, or say that it's protected by attorney-client privilege. And then the next step is we'll see some battles. You will probably see committees in Congress saying, great, now we want to see everything that you redacted in a closed in-camera session under our security clearances. so that we can determine whether you did this right or not. And the DOJ will go, you don't have the right to do that. And there'll be a fight back and forth. You will also have outside special interest groups who really would like to know this information, including some interest groups that represent the victims who have come forward. They will be submitting Freedom of Information Act requests, which are proper ways to ask the government, to tell the government that I would like this information, and then the government will have to defend against that. And of course, because this is such a huge political saga that we've been going through for years now, we will probably see lawsuits demanding the information.
Eric, I wonder, given your background in counter-espionage with the FBI, what are your thoughts on the suggestions that Jeffrey Epstein was able to get away with so much for so long, and indeed had so much money and some quite unexplained wealth, because he was, in fact, an asset, if not an agent of Israel, and that his friendship with the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak is seen by some as, if not evidence of that, it certainly adds weight to their belief that that could have been what in fact was going on. What do you think?
John, here, when people don't have information, when they don't have the facts, and when the government doesn't produce the facts for them, they speculate. And I see this as speculation. I don't think that Epstein was an agent of Mossad. That sparks to me as a conspiracy theory. And in the 30-some thousand pages of evidence that have come out, there's nothing that proves that. Now, certainly there were connections. It seems like they were friends. I don't see any evidence that he was an agent of Mossad, or there's another conspiracy theory that he was working for the CIA and trapping people and exploiting them. I don't see any evidence. I think he was just a really bad guy with a lot of money who people in power wanted to be around, and he was like a sucker fish who got close to them. When you're looking for an explanation, right, you want to look for the most obvious thing, not the wider ideas that take a lot of conjecture. And here it looks like the most obvious thing is that he was a guy who liked to broker and power and influence, and not a secret spy. And I'll add, John, that let's say just out of the blue, because look, I live in the world of espionage, that he was some sort of connection to espionage. We're never going to see it, because anything related to national security or foreign counterintelligence operations is not going to be part of this disclosure. That is a slam dunk, easy to redact and remove category of information.
And again, Eric, this is asking for speculation beyond known facts, but based on what you have seen and what you know from your career, what do you make of the circumstances around Jeffrey Epstein's death? Some maintain that it was, as the official line says, it was a suicide. Others still have their doubts, wonder if there was something else involved here.
I certainly expected that when the Trump administration came into power and Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, number 1 and 2 at the FBI, who were stomping and chomping at the bit to look into Epstein's death, I thought that information would be revealed that he did not commit suicide. And then, of course, the FBI is saying he committed suicide. I don't know where the truth is there. It seems to me that a lot of things were, the cameras turned off and the guards were gone, and suddenly he disappears in the one, moment of time where for some reason there was a glitch and the cameras weren't recording, and there were no cameras recording his cell, and he's such an important prisoner. It certainly feeds the conspiracy theory. I tend to default with going with the FBI when they make a public statement, and here they've said he committed suicide. It's certainly plausible he did. He was probably the most persona non grata person on earth who had been caught and was going to have to sit in court and hear all of the horrible things that he had done to children. And so it's plausible he committed suicide, but I understand anyone who believes that he didn't take his own life, because the facts could be interpreted the other way. So I think I'm going to err on the side of suicide with I really would like to look at that information a little closer.
And Chaz, just at the end there, I did ask Eric O'Neill about the connections between Jeffrey Epstein and Israeli intelligence. And Your next guest has a lot more information on that subject.
Certainly. You'd think that right now the media just couldn't get enough of Jeffrey Epstein-related material. It's a feeding frenzy. But you know, there is one big exception, and it's this area here, this whole issue of is he an intelligence source or not? It's a near media blackout being imposed on a whole series of hacked and leaked emails about this topic from what's believed to be an Iranian hacking group. And a number of those emails revolve around the very strange relationship that Jeffrey Epstein had with ex-Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. The Handala hacking group have released a number of emails about Ehud Barak's post-government career as a salesman of Israeli security services to embattled governments. Strangely, those efforts of his seem to be quietly facilitated by one Jeffrey Epstein. So, for example, the two of them brokered a lucrative security deal between Israel and Côte d'Ivoire. But the deals didn't end there. They also struck security deals in Mongolia, while at the same time creating extra business opportunities for Ehud Barak's clients on the side. And of course, once again, quietly behind the scenes was Jeffrey Epstein. Sometimes their deal-making wasn't just about selling weapons, though. Sometimes they seemed to turn themselves into some kind of alternative private diplomatic force, like when Epstein opened a back channel between Israel and Russia. He literally organised a meeting between Ehud Barak and Putin in a bid to encourage Russia to end the conflict. And then sometimes he just seemed to be a fixer of sorts, like Mr. Wolf in Pulp Fiction. Like, for instance, when Epstein had a senior Israeli intelligence officer stay in his Manhattan apartment on and off for years. Epstein just seemed to be at the nexus of high-ranking officials in both America and in Israel. Now, that might explain where he got a lot of that money from, but it also opens up so many more questions. So why don't I ask some of them? I spoke to a person from Dropsite, which is pretty much the only news website that is all over this story. Their investigative reporter, Ryan Grimm, in particular, is all over it. So I asked him what he believes the significance of these emails is.
The significance, and I would suggest that, for people who want to get into the details, we've set up now an entire section actually over at Dropsite News called Epstein and Israel. And I think the headline of that kind of subgrouping suggests, what the main significance is. Because for many, many, many years, people have been saying, we just don't know what it really was that Jeffrey Epstein did. We don't know where he made his money. We do know that he was engaged in a repulsive level of child sex trafficking. We don't know how he wound up in a position to be regularly dining with presidents, even turning down invitations to meet with presidents. In our latest story, he turned down an invitation to meet with Emmanuel Macron, or he begged off, said he had a cold. So how on earth is this guy, this former high school teacher, in this position of power among the global elite? And what we're finding as we're sifting through these documents and the correspondence is that, he was working on behalf of Israeli interests throughout much of his career. Sometimes that means, he's working with foreign prime ministers, sometimes with current minister of defense, sometimes helping to broker agreements between the Israeli government and other governments, but sometimes brokering private agreements between private Israeli investors. But that doesn't mean he was quote unquote Mossad or he was an Israeli spy. But we do know that he was working directly with people who were.
Of course, these emails don't necessarily mean that Epstein was a spy or working for Mossad. He could have just had a strange relationship with Ehud Barak. Epstein does seem to collect important people. Do you have a suspicion of your own, one way or the other?
What my colleagues and I have, I think, come to understand is that asking whether or not he worked, for Mossad or for the CIA is in some ways actually the wrong question, because it inverts the power relationship. For Epstein and for a lot of other people, who were at his level of power, it's more accurate to say that these spy agencies are kind of working for them. And particularly in the 2010s, but still today, the set of global elite that organized itself kind of around the annual Davos conference, you could call them Davos men and women, they still exist, but they've kind of reshaped themselves a little bit. But they're sort of supranational. If you are a Davos person, you may be Israeli, you may be American, you may be Russian, but ultimately your allegiance is to this global elite, and you're competing for influence and power kind of within this set. And so Epstein was at the very epicenter of that. Like he knew practically everybody, who would be at the very top of that ladder. And so when you're at that level, somebody who works for Mossad is kind of beneath you. Now, Mossad, the CIA, these other agencies, and other power groupings, can be helpful to these different factions within the kind of Davos world. But they work for the elites rather than the elites working for them.
But at the very least, do you think this answers the question? This is how Epstein made a lot of his money.
Yes. Now, in future stories, we're going to write more about how he originally came to a significant amount of his wealth. But what these emails do show you is how he continued to make himself valuable to very powerful and very wealthy people. It kind of boggles the mind, having gone through as much of his correspondence as we have, boggles the mind as to how he even had the time to do the sex trafficking on the side, because he is in constant contact, with the most powerful people in the world, arranging meetings and doing deals, involving himself in the domestic politics of enormous numbers of West African countries, for instance, doing all that while seemingly traveling the world constantly. So this was a very busy and very powerful man, and somebody who was like genuinely delivering for these powerful people. He was delivering them deals, he was delivering them money, he was delivering them power, and delivering them access. You often say, there's this assumption that he was merely a sex trafficker, that's all he was doing. In a lot of these cases, there was no blackmail needed in any of these, because everybody involved, wanted to use him because he was the connector who was going to make this shady deal come together. Whether it's in, Cote d'Ivoire, Mongolia, Nigeria, the UAE, you name it. He's the guy that you could go to that could make this happen. And whether the blackmail was happening or not, he was able to get that done. The blackmail, if it was going on, seems to have been almost going on in the background.
Do you have any sense of how Epstein got involved in all this? Like, how does this start? It's a very strange business to be a part of.
Epstein was very adept as early as the 80s and 90s at kind of worming his way into the world of elite / intelligence operatives. That much is squarely known in the public record, and he very quickly involves himself in these shady type of global operations that require the ability to move money without a trace, to connect people in a way that isn't going to raise alarms. You're talking about all of the different kind of what you could genuinely call kind of warlord activity. Moving, we're talking about mining magnates, weapons companies, drug smuggling. That was his world from very early on. And if you can rise to the top of that and make yourself useful in connecting people and moving money around, and that's where his understanding of kind of tax and global money laundering policy came in, then you can make yourself very rich very fast.
And the reporting of this, other than on Dropsite, has been, shall we say, limited. Why do you think that might be?
Yeah, there's a libertarian news outlet in the United States called Reason that has done some good reporting on this. It's been amusing to watch, because in the U.S. it's now become almost a social media meme in itself, that the American media is obsessively focused on the Epstein scandal, but has just completely lost its ability to do basic journalism when confronted with very clear connections between Epstein and the state of Israel, whether it's a top Israeli intelligence official staying for weeks on end at his apartment in Manhattan, whether it's him, working with the sitting Minister of Defense to strike up a security agreement with Cote d'Ivoire that leads to, the selling of a surveillance state to the country, whether it's the reporting that we did on Epstein helping to broker a back channel between Israel and Russia during the Syrian civil war. All of this stuff is there. And I know that there are very, very capable journalists at all of these outlets. But for whatever reason, so far, it has just been too much. The only time it snuck through was when Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene alluded to our reporting in a kind of hostile interview with CNN's Dana Bash. Because Dana Bash was saying, "How are you suggesting that Israel may somehow be involved in this?" And if all you watched was CNN, then Marjorie Taylor Greene would have sounded completely crazy, because CNN hasn't touched it. But all the emails, all the correspondence is right there for anybody who wants to read them.
So, with the president backflipping on the Epstein files just days after the longest government shutdown in US history came to an end, what are American voters making of all of this? A slew of polls were released yesterday, and they do not make for particularly happy reading for the president. Donald Trump's approval rating has fallen to just 38%, according to a new Reuters Ipsos poll, 40% from Marist. To Fox News, 41% support there, 43% approval in Marquette. Thank goodness for Rasmussen, a face saving 47% this week, but they very often top 50, so even that is down. At the end of the day, not even Trump's friends at Fox News are buying any of that.
And this is a huge wake-up call for Republicans. And if you actually look at Trump's approval rating, it actually has been sliding for a while. And I think what happened here is voters had a lot of optimism that he really was going to turn around the economy. And they've given him, 9 months now, and they've been waiting. But suddenly they've been looking around, and things really haven't improved.
I'm guessing that's Kim Strassel and probably Stuart Varney off the White House Christmas card list. But don't worry, because Donald Trump has his own pollsters.
But I met with 2 pollsters because we were starting to think about the next election. They said, "Sir, if George Washington and Abraham Lincoln came back from the dead and they aligned and they went for the president, vice president as a combination, you'd be beating them by 25 points."
So Abraham Lincoln polls at 14%?
That's what he's saying. I always said George Washington would be a drag on the ticket. Clearly Trump's pollsters know which side their bread is buttered on. And hopefully they were talking midterms, not 2028, when he was talking about that bit.
But I met with 2 pollsters because we were starting to think about the next election.
Presumably he is talking about the 2026 midterm elections, but things aren't looking great for that if you're a Republican at the moment as well. That same Marist poll, and it could be an outlier result because it's a little off the charts, but it had Democrats surging to a staggering 14 percentage point lead in a generic congressional ballot. Polls this week from Marquette and Qantas Insights put Democrats at a more reasonable 5 points up, which is only just above what is now the Real Clear Politics average of polls. So based on those, you'd have to say that Democrats are probably feeling as though they've emerged from this shutdown as the winners, at least for now. We'll see how those numbers go as healthcare premiums spike in the new year. But certainly one effect of the Democrat comeback is that some of those Republican redistricting plans that looked very, very clever and likely to net them maybe 5 extra seats in places like Texas, suddenly looking like maybe not such a great idea, because that redistricting involved them potentially shuffling around the borders of some seats that they could be suddenly making marginal. And if the economy goes really badly next year, they could be actually creating a landslide against themselves.
Yeah, I'll come back to the redistricting in a second, but just first of all, the outlier poll you cited.
Yeah.
Tell you why it's not an outlier, because there's worse polls.
Yeah, right.
Like CNN, he's got 37% approval. Let me tell you about the AP NORC poll, which no one wants to talk about because you're going, this just can't be right. 33% approval of how Trump is going in the AP NORC poll. That's a 10% drop from earlier in the year.
That's Harry S. Truman in 1952 kind of levels.
Yes, I mean, and we're talking only 68% approval of Republicans in that poll. Now that is that's the end of the world. If that was real, that's got to be an outlier. But all I'm saying is that and that's down from 81%, the Republicans back in March.
Right.
If like your outliers, they're middle of the road polls for Trump at the moment. He's doing that badly. If we look at the 50+1 average, which is the new 538, he's about to drop below 40% in the averages. He did not spend much time below 40% in his first term. There were some times.
Yeah.
But like that's not good.
That has been a feature of the last 2 decades as America's become increasingly partisan. The range in which presidents of both parties move is much smaller. You used to see presidents get 65% approval and then 6 months later they'd be down at 35% and they'd be back up at 58%. The swings are much smaller now, so losing 2 or 3 points off an average is bad news.
And even on the stronger polls, if you lift the lid, it's pretty ugly stuff in there. The Reuters poll was one of the actually stronger polls at the moment. Lift the lid, 26% of Americans say that Trump is doing a good job managing cost of living. 26%, down from 29% earlier in the month. 65%, including 1 in 3 Republicans, disapprove of Trump on the cost of living. And Epstein is not helping either. 20% of Americans, including just 44% of Republicans, approve of how Trump's handled the Epstein case. 20%. 70% of response in total, including 87% of Democrats, and 60% of Republicans said they believe the Trump administration is hiding information about Epstein's clients. So none of this is helping. So to go back to what you were talking about redistricting, the way that when you're gerrymandering, the way it works is by spreading your voters as thinly as possible across as many different electorates as possible.
So you're winning 55% rather than 75%.
Exactly.
You don't waste votes.
Exactly. You allow the Democrats to have 95% of one seat, wasting a whole bunch of votes, and you go 55, 55, 55. So if there's a uniform swing against you, especially amongst, say, Latinos, which there really are at the moment, those 5 gerrymandered seats could all just become Democrat seats.
Whoops.
They actually call it a dummy mander. Having said that, just this week, the courts threw out the gerrymander in Texas anyway, so it might be saving them from themselves.
Yeah, it's possible.
We'll see about that, but that's going back to the Supreme Court, so we'll see what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks in that field. The point is, he's not doing well.
Yeah. And there's a bit of pushback as well in Indiana, where the Republican-dominated state house is resisting Trump's pressure to gerrymander a couple of extra Republican seats out of Indiana, which coming as it did after what was, let's not forget, a major revolt against Donald Trump, probably the biggest of his 1 term and 1 year as president, what we saw, yes, he turned around at the last minute and said, vote for this Epstein Files Transparency Act, but he'd been opposing it until then, and over 100 Republicans were prepared to defy him. So that could be a defining moment of Donald Trump's presidency.
The same week that the Supreme Court is turning their back on his tariffs from the looks of things, the same week that Marjorie Taylor Greene stands up to him and he backs down. She beat him last week.
Yeah.
That has not happened before.
Interesting times.
Didn't have a good week.
No, indeed not. Well, that is it for another weekend edition of Planet America. We will see you for our final Monday night episode of 2025 on ABC TV at around 9:40 p.m. And we will be back here for the final Friday program on ABC News at the same time next week.
Both shows available on ABC, IV, YouTube and Facebook. And do not forget the Planet Extra podcast, PEP, in all the finest pod places, that's coming out on Saturday. And there's going to be a lot of Epstein, I assure you. And yes, PEP and Planet America are going to be back in 2026.
Bye-bye.